Hassan Diab spent more than 3 years in a French prison for his alleged role in a 1980 bombing outside a synagogue in Paris.
France called him a terrorist, and Canada approved his extradition based on flimsy evidence.
But even after 3 years, he was never charged with a crime, and France eventually released him, citing a lack of evidence.
They found numerous holes in the case, including evidence that Diab was in Lebanon writing university exams when the bomb went off.
Diab returned to Canada to rebuild his life earlier this year.
I don't want any penny from the taxpayers in Canada.
But now, a confidential memo obtained by CBC News sheds new light on Canada's role in the case.
A Canadian government lawyer went to great lengths to bolster France's crumbling case and seal Diab's fate.
That has now prompted a government response.
I think that this is indeed a matter which it is important to look into.
Lisa Laventure and David Cochran broke this story for CBC News earlier this week. They join us from Ottawa.
So, David, let's begin with you. How did you get onto this story?
Well, Diana, I don't want to undermine our work, but we never really intended for this to be an investigative story. I think this started with us when we were assigned to cover Hassan Diab's release from a French prison, and we went and spoke with his wife about what it meant to the family. And then we talked to them about doing a story about Hassan Diab's reintegration into normal life at the end of this 10-year legal battle after 38 months in prison. We wanted to show not just what he had been through, but how he puts the pieces back together now. And that was the story we were going to do, but then Lisa got her hands on the memo, which turned this into a much bigger story.
And Lisa, how did that memo change what was in front of you?
Well, I think because the story was new to David and I, we really spent time revisiting some really key questions about how Hassan Diab ended up in the situation that he did, and we asked those questions to sources that we spent some time developing. So it was really a really basic way of that kind of led our way down this path to finding this memo. And once we had that paper in our hands, really the most complicated part of the story was placing that memo within the greater context of this story. As David has said in a lot of our reporting, this is one of the most heavily litigated extradition proceedings in Canadian history. It spent years in court and produced thousands of pages of legal documents and transcripts. We spent a lot of time parsing through that to paint essentially a timeline that we could put this memo in and get create a better understanding of what it was telling us. And that led us to ask questions about the role that the Department of Justice lawyer, played in this. And we brought those questions to the Department of Justice, and they told us that this is just simply how extradition cases in Canada work, and that everything had happened by the book. And that was what was so surprising to us.
And I think surprising to all of us listening as well, because you can then very quickly put yourself in this man's position. If a foreign government thinks you've done something, David, how vulnerable does this story now say any one of us could be?
Yeah, this is the thing. Hassan Diab had an alibi. The fingerprints didn't match. The key evidence the French had was pretty weak to begin with. He had one of the best lawyers in Canada working for him for free for 9 years, more than $1 million in free legal bills, and an army of supporters crowdfunding to pay all of his other expenses, and he still spent 38 months in a French prison without ever facing a charge. So the way the extradition laws in Canada are written, the risk to your liberty is still severe, like it would be in any criminal case, but the protection of your rights and your presumption of innocence are much lower. So if this can happen to Hassan Diab, who has a PhD, his wife has a PhD, and they had all of that behind them and all of that evidence in support of them, it can happen to just about anybody. And I think it's an important part of Canada's international relations. It's important for Canadians to know that this is how we operate when a country like France comes looking for a Canadian citizen.
And Lisa, I guess there's reason to believe that his story may not be over yet.
Yeah, there's definitely still people in the French government that believe that Hassan Diab is responsible for the 1980 Rue Copernic bombing. It's important to remember that this bombing has a lot of historical significance in France. It was the first attack on a Jewish target after World War II. Of course, France being a country that's been greatly affected by terrorism up until today. So when he was released in January, the French government appealed his release, and that appeal was heard last month. The decision is coming on July 6th about what could happen next. The French government has expressed that they would like to see him extradited again, though that seems unlikely to happen at this point. But another option is that he could be tried in absentia. So this is not over for the Diab family at this point.
What an odyssey and a great story. Thanks for talking about it.
Thank you.